I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Holly. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We are very happy to be able to partner with UW Extension to bring you the research needed to be able to navigate our ever-changing environment. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for their valuable time and leadership, the growers for joining us, and Allison for being the catalyst from which all of these sessions rely. Thank you so much.
And want to give a big thank you to Sandeep and to Cesar and to Amaya, who'll be joining us as well, for being willing to present with us in this, our November kind of nationwide roundup virtual brown bag lunch. As in case there's anyone joining us for the first time, we do have these every month that isn't harvest and that Wisconsin doesn't have an in-person outreach event. So we're glad to get to take specifically the November and December sessions to catch up on new research that's gone on through the year, especially things that have happened outside of the state of Wisconsin, and make sure that everyone is up to date on the cool new things that are happening. To that end, today we're going to have Cesar Rodriguez Sauna from Rutgers is going to present some new kind of up-to-date information on the blunt-nosed leafhopper. They've been doing more work in the past couple of years and going to make sure that we have everything as up-to-date as possible on that. Sandeep Bhatti is at UMass and is a postdoc research associate there, and he's been doing some pretty exciting work on frost modeling and has some spring data to share with us. And then our Amaya Atucha of University of Wisconsin-Madison is going to present in the topics of color, especially just before harvest and even after fruit has come off the vine. A couple of housekeeping notes. We have closed captions on. If you prefer to see those, you can choose ... and view closed captions. I have the chat on. We really love to have people ask questions over the course of the event. So if you have a question, you can either unmute yourself and ask it, or you can ask in the chat. You can also use to Allison and ask a question directly to me. And if you do that, I will ask that question anonymously on your behalf. And with that housekeeping out of the way, I think we are good to see if we've got a representative from the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association to give us a welcome, but I don't, if you are here, anyone, go ahead and unmute yourself and say welcome, but I just want to thank, I am the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and I get a lot of guidance from the Professional Development Committee of the Wisconsin State Growers Association in terms of getting suggestions for who should speak at these. So always appreciate feedback and make sure we're talking about the most relevant things. And I will let Amaya begin her presentation on how our fruit coloration happens, and that was a popular question around harvest this year, so wanted to get some answers on that. And thank you for being willing to join, and then we'll have questions for all three of our speakers in the last 5 minutes of the hour.
All right. Well, thank you for the invitation to present on this topic. I know from our research roundtable, there was a lot of talk about this. So I just put a very simple presentation to talk a little bit about, color development in berries, the very basic, and just specifically talked about what are the environmental factors that are affecting the color development, as well as some management factors, and where growers can and where growers can't do something to help us develop some color. So let me get started here with talking about what are anthocyanins, which are basically these natural plant pigments that give the color to our berries. They belong to the family of the flavonoids, so it's a type of color pigment. They provide the red, purple and blue colors that we see in many of the fruits that we consume. And they also have some really important attributes regarding fruit quality. In the case of cranberries, we know that a lot of these pigments have positive health components, and they are also very much related with the quality of the fruit and what the consumers are looking for. Everybody wants to, consume a beautifully red cranberry, so they're very much related with premiums for fruit quality. So I don't know why my cursor is not working here. Give me 1 second. There we go. So cranberries have a specific group of anthocyanins that give them this red color. You can see there listed the 4 different anthocyanins. And cranberries are relatively simpler fruit in terms of the combination of its different anthocyanins. There are some other fruits, such as grapes, that have a lot more complicated and they have a lot more anthocyanins types. And the beauty of it being simpler in the case of cranberries is that there has been some really good research because of this simplicity on trying to identify how environmental conditions are affecting this very limited group of anthocyanins. When you have a lot more different types of anthocyanins and different pathways of production of anthocyanins, things can get a lot more complicated. So we have a pretty good idea about how, specifically light and temperature affects the development of anthocyanins and thus the color of the fruit in cranberries. So this looks a little bit complicated, but I think it's important to try to understand a little bit what's the pathway for this production of anthocyanins, again, which is the color pigment that gives the red color to the berries. Anthocyanins are produced in the fruit in the late stage of fruit development. So once we started seeing, the blush states all the way to harvest is when the actual anthocyanins, the pigment, is being produced. However, before we start seeing any color, and this is really important, the enzymes that are triggering these reactions that you can see on that little figure on the left side of the screen, those enzymes are being produced. And this happens before we start seeing the color. The switch to producing these enzymes and starting priming these enzymes happens when the fruit reaches what we call maturity. So there's no color, but we start seeing that the fruits are mature. We start seeing that the pulp of the fruit has starting to change their structure. Fruit starts getting a little bit softer. When that happens, when there's a switch into fruit maturity, there's a cascade of reactions that are happening inside the fruit. That's when these enzymes are being produced, and that is what's triggering the production of these anthocyanins. We do know that light and temperatures regulate some transcription factors. This basically means light and temperatures are regulating the production of these enzymes, like how these enzymes and proteins are being produced. So I'll explain the following slides how these 2 factors will affect the production of the enzymes. And if we don't have enough of these enzymes, then we don't have what we need to be able to trigger the formation of anthocyanins and the production of anthocyanins. So let's start talking a little bit about the role of light. So light is the main trigger of this pigment pathway. We need light exposure to be able to start producing the enzymes that eventually will produce the anthocyanins. Fruit that is exposed to the sun will color faster and also will produce higher quantities of anthocyanins. The opposite, fruit that is shaded, especially in dense canopies where we have maybe too much nitrogen, will have a delay production of color, and then the overall concentration is going to be lower. Early season light really helps to be able to start producing some of these enzymes. but really is the late season light that is critical to trigger the production of anthocyanins. So we need light all the entire process of fruit development. But the light that we received at the very beginning, you can see those images there. There's 3 pictures. We have, the green berries. We have berries with a little bit of blush, and then we have what will be sort of like a mature berry with color development. In the first stage, the picture, the furthest left picture, when you get light exposure of the berries at that time, is when we're priming a lot of the enzyme production. But that period is critical. But if we were not to get light at the very end, I don't know if you can see my cursor where the pigment starts producing, it doesn't matter how much we primed and we have a lot of enzymes, still we're going to have poor color. So early sun exposure is necessary, but really is the late sun exposure, which is the most critical for the final step of anthocyanins production. Temperature interacts with light, is also a primer for the color development. Cool nights, especially nights between 40 to 60 Fahrenheit, strongly increase this enzyme activity and the production of anthocyanins. So when we have warmer nights, which is something that we're seeing more and more in Wisconsin, what's happening is that those enzymes are less responsive and they're working at a lower rate, so we have less color development. And another thing that I think I talked about this at the roundtable, but for those growers that were not there, something that is also really important is this differential between temperatures during the day and temperatures during the night. So not only we want the temperatures at night to be cool in this 40 to 60 Fahrenheit, but we also want to have a substantial difference in temperature between the maximum temperature during the day and the minimum temperature during the night. So anywhere between 15 to 25 Fahrenheit degrees of difference between the day and the night, that really boosts the color development. So those 2 things, the temperature at night, how cold it is, but also the differential is going to affect the color development. So why some years color is better than others? Well, here's a couple of combinations in which we have different scenarios of color development. In years when we have high fruit exposure to light during the entire development of the fruit, and we also have cool nights, we have some really good color. In years when we mostly have cloudy days, but we also have warm nights, we ended up having poor color development. And shaded fruit in warm years is when we have the worst color performance. And so I put together there a little figure that explains how light and temperatures are affecting the color development. So higher amount of lights in the fruit development stage will increase anthocyanin production, as well as cool nights, but warm nights really suppress color development. So I know I've been looking at temperature records that warmer night is something that we are experiencing in Wisconsin, and that might be one of the contributors to some years of bad color development. What growers can control versus what they can't? Well, growers can influence a couple of things. Canopy density, which affects exposure. The denser the canopy, the less light we're going to have on the fruit during development. We know that too much nitrogen inputs where we can control it is going to result in higher canopy density, longer uprights that can result on more shaded fruit. We know that some cultivars have higher color than others, so the cultivars of choice will also affect, and the timing of harvest. If we are harvesting earlier and we haven't gotten those cooler nights, then maybe we are not developing as much color as we could potentially by leaving the fruit in the field to be exposed to some of those cooler temperatures. Things that we cannot control, temperature patterns, we cannot control cloud cover, and we definitely cannot control day and night temperature swings. Can cranberries develop color after harvest? This was one of the questions that one day Allison emailed me, and I added it here because I think that this really triggered this talk. Short answer is yes, but it's not enough to rely on. And so let me explain you why. Cranberries, and this is really solid research that has been done, cranberries can continue to make anthocyanins after they're harvested. if they are stored at a moderate temperature, so temperatures between 45 and 55 Fahrenheit. If we expose them to light after harvest, it would also help develop more color on pale fruits. Warm storage, a little bit warmer, between 50 and 60 Fahrenheit, can lead to significant color increase, especially in fruits that are sort of like a little bit of pinkish or really like pale white color. Why is this not commonly used? Why don't we use this technique to develop more color on fruits? Because the same conditions, which is warm temperatures and light, is also what is going to trigger the fruit to start decaying, softening, and seeing more rot. So yes, on one hand, with these conditions, we get more color development, but then at the same time, we are going to start having softer and more fruit rot if we expose them to these temperatures. Cold storage, which is usually what we use to preserve the fruit before the fruit gets frozen, if it's going to sweet and dry production, or goes into juice production, does not promote new color. So if we store them at the 35, 40 degrees at which they're usually stored, there's no more color development. And the post-harvest color that you develop if you put them in this warmer conditions is never going to be better than when we have them in the field. So cranberries can redden after harvest, but the best, most uniform color develops in the field itself under good sunlight and cold nights. And post-harvest color gains is real, but it's really not practical. So with that, I don't want to go over time, and I know there's a lot of questions for the other speakers, but I'm happy to answer questions about color.
I think that actually kind of dives us in perfectly to the question segment. I'm going to share my screen for the very end so that people can see upcoming events while we are discussing questions. But that was all really excellent stuff. A lot of, I think myself included, had a modest understanding of generally like how does color work, but that provided a lot of extra detail that I know I was glad to receive. So thank you for that presentation. I know we've got more than, we've got nearly 40 people on the call here. I would love to hear all of your questions across color, across frost, and across the blunt-nosed leafhopper research. Until I hear others, I will ask. I had asked in the chat on Sandeep's slide for growth stages and tolerance. You had put kind of a single band for this is the Wisconsin response temperature and this is the Massachusetts response temperature, but didn't clarify which variety that was for. Peter had replied that they do have different cultivar tolerance for each cultivar, monitoring for early blacks, for Howe's, for Benlier, and for Stevens, and the newer hybrids go along with the Benlier. But do you recall when you made that chart which cultivar was your chosen one for Wisconsin and for Massachusetts?
Yeah, so thanks, Allison, for that's a good catch. But I was thinking about putting that in, but yeah, like Peter said, it's the newer hybrid cultivars, for example, Benliers. You can apply that to Benliers or Demore Envilles or some of the or Malika Queens. Those would apply to the ones for Massachusetts side of things. And for Wisconsin, I got these numbers from Robert, and if he is on the call here, maybe he can clarify. So I'm not sure what varieties that particular one was. I'm assuming it was also for hybrids and some of the newer varieties, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, this is Robert, Sandeep, and that was for Benlier.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, apples to apples.
Fantastic. Thank you. That is just a question that I know comes up a lot. I see Amaya had raised her hand, and then I have another question in the chat. So Amaya, I'll let you jump in there.
Sure. I also have some questions about the work that Sandeep present. So did I understand this correctly? So you define a frost event based on an arbitrary threshold during that period in the spring. So at the very beginning of the spring, it doesn't matter what cultivar it is, but there's a specific threshold. And then that changes over time. So here's a couple of questions. From the practical point of view, if you're a grower and you want to use this data, first question, do you need to monitor data to input into the model to have a prediction? Or where else would, like, not all growers have, they're monitoring data outside of the beds to be able to add this input to the model, which is the input that you're adding from those horto sensors that you have. Would they use any other forecasted data? Like, could they use the Wisconsin? Could they use not? The second one, do they have to tell the model and constantly be changing when those thresholds, regardless of the variety it is changing? And this is kind of complicated because my question goes here into, like, how did they decide that? Because if you look at the bed, there's never one phenological stage. So they already make the decision when they're going to decide to turn on their irrigation or not. But your model is based, like, these frost events are defined by this, like, kind of subjective, depending on the user for the frost. So I'm concerned about, like, how will you actually use it if you're a grower? So those are my questions. Where would you get the temperature data, and how would you define those thresholds and how those thresholds would be changing over time? Is that something that is embedded in the model, or the growers would have to input it every time they run the model?
Awesome. Thank you, Maya, for the questions. So from what I heard, it was mainly about two things. One was what kind of parameters goes into the model, and in the future what growers would have to, manually enter the stuff in the model and get an output. That was the first one. The second one I heard was about the thresholds, whether they were arbitrary, and how would you kind of ground truth, if you will, the phenological stages that the grower are using. Let's talk about the first one, about, like, the data fetching, we call it. Basically, at this stage, yes, we have developed this model, and I have to manually go in my computer and download this data. We don't expect this to, the growers to do this, which is why I mentioned in the future work the web application. That web application, what it will do is it will have for growers a front end, like, user kind of interface, kind of like Wisconsin. I think that's a great model to follow, Wisconsin's network. So you go there, everything is laid out for you. You just make a few clicks, whatever location you want to select. It's just shown, everything in there. That's our goal, is whatever we do in the back end is all automated. So for example, if I click on this location, for example, Plover, I go in that weather station, I'm automatically, that weather station data is being fetched automatically. The grower is just viewing and making their decisions and noting things down, right? So that's our goal, is so the data that I presented here, whether it's Wisconsin or the HRR model, all that could be automated. All that data could be, we have a backend coding, if you will, like that code basically in the future will grab data based on the user, and it's gonna run the numbers, munch down numbers in the background and give a reading based on the grower. That'll be kind of the function of the web app.
Can I ask one clarification? And right now the model is being trained on that sort of data, because the Wisconsin is measuring temperature data really high compared with the bed. And I know, so when you are running the model and you're creating the model right now, you're using that high temperature data from the Wisconsin, right, or are you using the data that you have with your sensors? Because if you're training it with your sensors, then when the growers are going to use the Wisconsin, then those two things wouldn't match.
Thanks for adding, because I was going to miss that point. Great point. So the horto sensors data that we collected in this project is just for training. What I mean by training is the model is learning what it has to predict in the future. So in the future, it's not going to be like, the model is not going to expect, well, what was your March temperature today? Like, for example, if I want to have a forecast, the model is not going to ask for it. Rather, in the past, it's looking at the trends. It's trying to learn oh, if the dew point in Plover was this marsh at this location had this minimum temperature. If the weather, cloud cover, blah, blah, blah was this, then so it's in the future, it's not going to look for or expect a marsh temperature. The additional data that I said in my future slides, that is exclusively to additionally train the model. But when we have and I do want to point out, this is not a final model. The results I presented, this is not like we are done with the model, now we're going to make it an app. This is still a work in progress, and we definitely, I believe there's a lot of room for improvement, and that improvement will come if we have more data. We have more days to look at. We have more frost events to learn from. That's our goal. And there's so many things we can even try feature-wise. Like we are using Visconet. We can even use growers' weather stations from Auto. We can use all sorts of other leverage all data sets that are out there. That's the beauty of random forest model. So that's that. And then the second question was regarding your threshold. So that's a great point. Usually in Massachusetts, what we do is when we go out to monitor like the phenological stage, we do notice sometimes there's variability within the same bed. We usually, I think what growers do here is they look for more advanced stage, and that's what they declare the bud stage for that bed. For example, it was a bud stell versus bud swell versus cabbage head. In the same bed, they will say cabbage head would be the bud stage because they want to be more conservative side, right? So that's what on a field level that would be that. So I'm gonna work with like stakeholders, for example, the Grower Association, to constantly keep updating the app in terms of like the threshold, so we are able to accurately determine frost. So that's number one. Secondly, we can rely on GDD as well as a backup. If I don't have the data, we can rely on GDD, be like, okay, this is the GDD for this region. Your crop will be around here. Of course, there's some, it's not going to be super perfect, but that's the second backup. Third is we're going to give growers a minimum marsh temperature, and we will say based on a threshold cabbage head, and a threshold temperature of 30, you will have a frost. If your phenological stage in your bed varies, please adjust your frost forecast accordingly based on the minimum forecasted temperature of 25 maybe, So we'll give growers that disclaimer and flexibility to decide for themselves whether a 25 minimum marsh temperature is a frost for them or not for tonight, So I hope I didn't miss anything.
No, I think that's really good. I'm gonna add a couple more questions. We've got a bit from Cesar, and then a couple from Amaya, and then at the very end I will read out the answer to those grower polls that you had asked, and just make sure we're hitting everything in the questions. We are over 1 o'clock, but I assume that since we still have nearly everyone is still on the call, we'll just keep running with questions until people run out of time. But knowing that we have gone over the full.
Allison.
Oh,
Casey, can I just add one thing to Sandeep's comment?
Yes, absolutely.
If a grower wants to use our model, they will need two things: an internet connection to access our website and the tolerance of their variety. That's it. That's all the grower needs to know to use our model.
Awesome. Thank you for adding that. That's the less required, the more likely we are to be able to implement it. So thank you so much for making that a light requirements. Thanks for adding that, Casey. I'm going to add a couple other things, and then we'll keep moving through the chat here. Cesar did share in the chat 3 additional videos that they have made at the Rutgers Entomology Lab. And if you are on your phone right now and you can't follow a YouTube link without losing access to this meeting, if you later go to YouTube and search Rutgers Entomology Seminars, that is where those can be found without leaving the current meeting. Wanted to add that. And then I think we've hit most of the frost questions live. although we got a new one just come in. But let's jump to Amaya real quickly. We had a question on what would you say is the general relationship between fruit sizing and color progression?
They're two different processes, completely independent. Though what I did say at the beginning of the presentation is that the fruit has to hit that fruit maturity state to be able to start the development of anthocyanins. And the reason why is because things are a lot more complex than what we try to present. But the plant there has to be a switch from the plant from growth to allocating those additional carbohydrates to color production. So you need those sugars to be able to develop the anthocyanins. And so when that switch happens is when the color really starts developing. But the sizing of the fruit and the enlargement of the berry is a separate process from the color development. Obviously, we see them both happening together, but what is controlling those processes are different conditions. So you can't use one to predict the other, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Another color question was, and this is from Jeff. So we do see a color improvement after 4 weeks, or across 4 weeks in a cooler at 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And a comment that G1 seems to be the variety that increases color improvements the most. That's more of a comment than a question, but just a little lived experience there. And do we have other color items? I think we're good on color for the moment. There was a okay, so that's the bit on color. I'll read another comment from Cesar, and then I'll show Sandeep's polls, and we'll go through. It sounds like the frost is generating conversation, so we'll let that happen. The addition from Cesar was one video is the one that he showed today. The other is in New Jersey grower interviews, and the third is ongoing research by scientists in New Jersey at that Rutgers Entomology Seminars channel. All right, I want to make sure if we are dropping people at the after 1 o'clock, I do again want to thank Cesar and Sandeep and Amaya all for presenting. I'm going to share these poll results and then we'll dive into more questions. So in general, people answered for their spring frost forecasts. 50% of growers are using bed temperature sensors, 25% weather applications, and then 25% the Great Lakes Weather Service forecasting model, or the Cranberry forecast. Is that current frost warning system accurate for you? We got 55% said yes, 36% said sometimes, and 9% not applicable. There were 2 people who monitor their minimum temperature on frost nights with sensors adjacent to cranberry beds without interference from irrigation, and those 2 people were willing to share their data. So those 2 people, since this is an anonymous poll, I can't single you out and have Sandeep contact you. So if you're still on this call, please do contact Sandeep. And then the other 82% do only have temperature sensors on the beds. Finally, the auto start pumps triggered by bed temperature sensors, 45% have them on all beds, 18% have them on some beds, and 36% don't have auto start pumps triggered by bed temperature sensors. Sandeep gives his email address, sandeep.bhatti@umass.edu. And if you're interested, you can also email me if you didn't catch that, and I'll connect you to him. So if you're willing to share data, that's always greatly beloved by people who are doing research. All right, so that was the poll results. I'm just going to jump through and make sure that we've caught all the questions. We have yep, it seems like the Sandeep's model is mainly a temperature forecast, It is also identifying instances when temperature crosses a fixed temperature threshold. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about aspects of your model that I'm overlooking or misinterpreting. This is from another researcher.
Mm. Hey, Michael, that's a great observation. Yes, I would primarily say this is a temperature forecast, which is converted to a frost classification based on the phenology or phenological stage um, from the marsh. So that's pretty much the gist of it. But we use, weather data. We in the future we want to use more geographic features of the marsh to shape our temperature predictions. And one thing I missed mentioning is we are also looking at, so right now, currently we are doing, for this evening, we have a forecast for the night, but also we want to have a forecast for tomorrow night as well in the future, so that's also, that's something I'm currently working on is right now, if I get the data for 6 p.m., can I have a good enough forecast for tomorrow night? Of course, it's not going to be like tonight's forecast will, of course, be more accurate, but I think if there's a severe frost coming our way, if we can even give growers that heads up, that would be awesome. So that's another thing we're trying to look into in the future. So
Awesome. Thank you.
thank you.
Another question, do producers of Massachusetts usually only rely on the frost forecast? Don't they follow their buds stage and adjust in consequence? New cultivars tend to develop more quickly. And that's a question from Quebec, and Sandeep had answered it in the chat, that in mass growers do look at their bud stages and adjust the forecast accordingly. The tolerances do change based on the cultivar. Anything to add to that? Or I think sounds like
Just so we know, there's on the UMass Cranberry Station's website, there are fact sheets for spring frost tolerance and fall frost tolerance that are, of course, applicable to Massachusetts, but maybe it's applicable to other regions too. But it's good to look at and see. And yeah, there's on those fact sheets, it clearly says which variety is what tolerance based on the bud state. So that's another resource that you can refer to, and I can put the link on the chat as well.
That'll be fantastic. And if you email it to me, since more of our growers have had to head out to their afternoon work, I'll be able
Sure.
to send that out.
Awesome. I'll do that.
Another addition from Peter, the phenology of the bud is an integral part of the model as it affects tolerance. So that's very as it should be. Amaya asks, for growers that already have bed temperature monitoring sensors, how would your model provide more information?
For the growers that already have bed temperatures. Yep. So for growers who are already monitoring bed temperatures, so if I have, for example, if a bed temperature at our research site here, I can know like in the evening, yeah, my bed temperature is reporting like 40, but at that time in the evening, I cannot, there's no way for you just using those bed temperature sensors. I can be like, oh yeah, at the night it'll be like 20 based on if it's 40 now, so that the model gives growers that any additional information, not just the present, but in the future. So that's why it's a forecast. It's not just so that's what the difference is. It's not just it's present, it's in the future.
And Peter adds another comment about wanting to check whether altitude contributes to frost dynamics, which could be an interesting additional wrinkle.
Yep. Definitely.
It looks like questions are slowing down, but to give people just one more opportunity to ask questions if they have any, I will read out our upcoming events. So the next brown bag is December's brown bag, Friday, December 19th, from noon to 1 Central. That'll feature Brad Bowling of UW Food Scientist on some cranberry-based gums, Virginia Stockwell of Oregon Plant Pathology on stem gall, and Hannah Gaines Day with the UW pollinator group, and she would be talking about weeby as well as where pollinators have been foraging. Cranberry School, of course, is going to be Wednesday and Thursday, January 14th and 15th. and watch for more information from Anne coming to you for that. One thing to note is that they do have the early bird pricing ends on December 1st. I know that's earlier than it maybe has been in the past, so be aware if you want the early bird pricing. That helps them lock in food prices at the most affordable rate. So sign up for Cranberry School by December 1. And then our nutrient management plan training is going to be Tuesday, February 3rd at the Millston Cranberry Innovation Center, formerly known as Wisconsin Cranberry Research Station. And then Sandeep sent out a couple of fact sheets. There's umass.edu/agriculture-food-environment/cranberry/fact-sheets. And then also that same UMass agriculture, food, environment, cranberry/fact sheets, and then spring frost tolerances of cranberry buds 2019. And I will be able to send those out to people who are curious as well. I do appreciate everyone's patience for rolling with us all the way to 20 minutes after the hour, but I know that we had really good, really relevant topics that everyone was excited to learn more about. So I want to give a huge thank you to Cesar and to Sandeep and to Amaya. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And a lot of the growers are putting a thank you in the chat as well.